we are so fortunate to be bureaucrats. So my role is a public servant, my colleagues are public servants, and we work with about 20,000 other public servants across these three ministries of employment, of economic and business affairs, and the Ministry of Taxation. And we help, basically our fundamental mission is to help our colleagues get better ideas that work. And in our journey over the last decade of MindLab's existence, we've discovered that design, or you can call it strategic design, you could call it design thinking, as has until recently been the term, or you can, as I do, call it co-creation, is a helpful way of not just thinking about, but also working practically with this kind of involvement. One example, not from Denmark, of how designers and ethnographers can help design public services is from Australia. Not from Melbourne, where we just were a moment ago with the Seeing Eye Dog, but from the city of Adelaide, where there's a place called, an organization called the Australian Centre for Social Innovation. Now, it's not a governmental organization like ours, it's independent, it's a not-for-profit, but it's part funded by government. And what the Australian Centre for Social Innovation does is to apply design and social research, and an understanding of public management to try to deal with difficult societal problems. And one of their first, and looks as if it's also going to be a successful project, is called Family by Family. And in this project, they took on one of the most difficult societal challenges we have, which is what they, in Australia and other countries, call chaotic families. So chaotic families are families that are characterized by violence, by alcohol abuse, unemployment. That's part of the reason, perhaps, where there is these challenges. And where basically, when government meets these kinds of families, the big question usually is, should we take the children away? So, or when should we take the children away? Under which conditions? And the Australian Centre for Social Innovation said, well, what if we could think about success? What would success be in dealing with these families? And they started exploring the actual lives and the day-to-day life of members of these families in Adelaide, and did it with an ethnographic view and with a design approach. And what they found was that most of these families, when they wake up in the morning and the members of the family wake up, they don't ask themselves, how do we manage to get through the day so they don't take the kids away? That's not the answer, that's not the question they're sort of asking themselves. What they're asking themselves actually is, how do we become a thriving family? How do we become a good family without all these challenges and problems? So that's what actually was what concerned people, was to become a thriving, happy family. And government hadn't really recognized that. And the interesting thing with this project is that one manager from the city government was part of the project. So she had been a manager of this intervention, of this effort, which hadn't worked for these families for 10 years. And now she has, for the last 8 months, been part of the project and seen what would happen if you start thinking about these families as families that want to thrive, that have resources, that have potential. And what has happened is that by engaging with these families, change is beginning to happen. Real change that means that these families are now connecting the chaotic families with families in the same situation, but are the positive deviants that actually were doing okay. So the project has linked those few families that were getting by in spite of the context, in spite of the challenges, with the families that were very, very chaotic. And they've begun to change the dynamics of it, and these chaotic families are beginning to thrive again. And I interviewed the manager from government who was part of this project. And she told me, and this is also on our blog at MindLab, so you can read it for yourself. She told me, this has been amazing. I have worked for 10 years and really made no impact at all. We have not changed anything for these families except take the kids away. And in this project, it's turned out it could be different. We could actually redesign our intervention, redesign services in a way where these families actually could get on with their lives again. So how do we, as governments, as public organizations, deal systematically in new creative ways and strategically thinking about the long term with these challenges? And that is the reason why governments are beginning to look to this term or this word innovation, and also to design as perhaps something that could help. So that is a bit of like the challenge. So you'll click it, this thing? Okay, thanks. So what we do at MindLab with these three ministries, these are just, you can see these are the front of the three Danish ministries. We believe that co-creating, which means involving the very end users, whether they're citizens or businesses, in the design of new solutions is the key to deal with these wicked societal problems. So now when we speak about challenge society, the concept of wicked problems becomes central. How many of you know the term wicked problems? Okay, some of you know it. And actually more of you know it than usually when I speak with public servants. They don't know what it is, even though that's actually what they work on every day. So just to share with you briefly, what is a wicked problem? A wicked problem, in Danish you would say, ondartede problemer. A wicked problem is a problem where we don't even know to what extent it's a problem. So let's take climate change. There's actually an international debate over whether climate change is a problem or not. There's also one about whether it's happening. But even if it is happening, is it a problem? In our country, in Denmark, there's a debate over integration of ethnic minorities in our society. And there's a debate over whether that is a problem or not. And if you do agree it's a problem, there's certainly a big debate over what are the kinds of solutions we need. So there's also a debate and uncertainty about appropriate solutions. And thirdly, these are problems that will never be solved. There will never be the day when we say we have enough environmental sustainability. There will never be the day, I think, that we've said we tackled this climate thing. It's fine. That's done with. We can go on to something else. There will never be the day probably when we say we have sufficient employment in our societies. Or there will never be the day when we say we have sufficient happiness, or whatever it is we strive for. So we are combating and politically debating whether there are problems. There are conflicting solutions, none of which will ever, by the way, solve them. And this is what most public servants go to work to deal with every single day, whether it's working with chaotic families, or it's combating climate change, or it's generating more business growth, or whatever it is. So in government, when we talk about innovation, as you know, of course, is about creating value. And in government, value is not making more money. Well, it is for the Ministry of Taxation. For them, it's a little bit about how do we get more money in to finance the welfare state. Even in the United States, I was there last week, and it turned out that they have a bit of a problem because a lot of American corporations don't pay their taxes either, just like here in Denmark. So I think it was General Electric, small company with a couple 100,000 people. They don't pay any taxes in the United States. So that is a problem to fund our societies. But in general, I would say that in the public sector, value is something different. It's certainly productivity, so how do we get more with less resources? It's also service experience, not service satisfaction, but experience in terms of how do we actually experience what government does to us. Thirdly, it's outcomes. And outcomes, that's really when I say co-creating for a better society, that is really what it's about, isn't it? It's about health, it's about, we could even say happiness, it's about those that want growth, it's about growth. Those that want environmental sustainability, it's about that. Those that want safety in the workplace, it's about that. It's all the good things that we want to create in society. Those are outcomes or results. And finally, there's a value around democracy. So how to create transparent, open societies with participation, with empowerment. How do we make sure we have a rule of law, treat citizens in an equal way before the law, and so on. So there is a question of that as well. So when we deal with innovation or value or change in the public sector, these are some of the key dimensions that we need to work on. Not to make a profit, but to create public organizations that can deliver on all of these. And it is not a big challenge to just deal with one of these types of values. So in the United Kingdom, for example, it's not difficult to lay off 500,000 public servants and save some money. But what is difficult under the heading of the big society is to create a society that actually generates better outcomes, more health, better services, and so on at the same time. So the innovation challenge in government is to expand on all of these four bottom lines at the same time, or at least not to damage one of them at the cost of another. And creating solutions with people, not for them, is about several things. It is about, well, engaging people. So citizens are people, business representatives are people, but bureaucrats are also kind of people. Kind of. Not fully, not totally, but they're almost like people. So are technology vendors, so are designers, so are sector-level experts or professors, academic experts, and so on. We need to engage a much wider variety of people in the process of creating or crafting or designing new public policies and services. If they in Adelaide in Australia hadn't involved the families themselves in the creation process of a new platform for creating or helping families to be thriving again, they couldn't have done that. They couldn't have thought that out behind the desk, or theoretically, they had to do it in practice and meet families where they lived. Actually, in Australia, they met them in the local McDonald's or the local Burger King to meet people where they actually were, where these families were going, and to actually sit down and interview them in their context where they lived. Have dinners with them or meals at home, stay overnight with them, and so on. So involving people is about well, the right people, or the people that are the intended recipients of services, but it's also involving your colleagues. So, for example, if you want to change how family services in a municipality are run, you may not need to just change how you work in the family department. You may need to change how the other social workers are working, how they work with communications, how the health services are working. What about the police? They need to get involved as well. So we want to create new solutions in complex bureaucratic organizations. You need to work across the silos and engage people across. That in itself is a huge challenge, notwithstanding the big challenge of even getting close to citizens. Secondly, you need a different kind of knowledge. So you need this close-up, ethnographic, detailed, rich, contextual knowledge about experience, about what makes sense, what is meaningful, what is useful, what is appropriate for people in their lives. And this is qualitative knowledge, and they can be worked just as rigorously with and as concentrated with as quantitative knowledge, but there's just no competence and no experience in governments or in a lot of organizations with dealing with this kind of knowledge, capturing it, using it to drive a process. And finally, this is where design certainly comes in, but comes in everywhere, I think, is we need a different process, a different way of working, a different, simply a way of developing solutions. The first is that what is really at the heart of this process is what I call professional empathy. It's about experiencing what citizens experience for themselves. There's this wonderful quote from To Kill a Mockingbird. Does anyone know the book To Kill a Mockingbird? Some of you, especially international audience. So in that book, which is a wonderful book, one of the key person, Atticus Finch, tries to explain something about empathy to a child. And he says, you know, to really understand how someone else thinks, you have to get under their skin or crawl into their skin and actually walk around in it for a while. You have to walk around in other people's skin for a while. And now we're talking about a different color skin perhaps as well, right? So professional empathy is about trying to get under other people's skin and experience what they experience. We can't ever do that really, but we can try. And we need to get much better at trying. So to conclude, I think there are three principles that are the core of driving public sector innovation through this idea of co-creating. And the first is to get so close up that you can really feel, as they say in the participle in the UK, they say you have to work with the grain. You have to work with the detail of people's lives to find out what resources could they have and how might we apply those, that knowledge and that insight in driving change, number one. Number two, we have to zoom very far out for redesign, much further than we usually do. I used to say that public managers are like stuck in the middle. They never go far away from their own jobs and look at the system, and they never go close up. So we're stuck in the middle, and we don't really know how to navigate. But we need to zoom out and redesign the systems level structure. I'm not saying it's easy to change these relationships, but that's what we're going to have to do. And finally, as a consequence, this means that we're no longer just delivering services to people and throwing them at people or businesses, but we're actually leveraging the resources we have. We can discuss whether we have enough of them, but whatever we've got to create better outcomes. And that must, at the end of the day, I think, be, if not the role of government, then certainly one of the ultimate roles of public organizations.